Welcome to her remarkable history. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. The head of the French beast that executed thousands. Throughout the French Revolution, there were a number of people who exhibited brutal behaviour that resulted in the executions of civilians. One of those was Jean-Baptise Carrier, who was notable for this action during the Reign of Terror. He was a man tasked with suppressing royal sentiments, and he would oversee the executions of 4,000 civilians. Many of these were women and children, and even priests, who were drowned in the River Loire, which became known as the National Bathtub. But Carrier would himself fall from grace, and he would, like thousands, lose his head on the guillotine. But what is the story of this? Jean-Baptise Carrier would become a leading figure in the French Revolution, and he was a member of the National Guard and was a Jacobin. He was well known in revolutionary circles, and he would vote for the execution of King Louis XVI and took part in the overthrow of the Girondins. He was dispatched to Normandy and was then sent to Nantes to work to suppress the revolution of the monarchists and those who were against revolution. He would set up in Nantes a tribunal that would judge people suspected of harbouring feelings and sentiments for the old regime. The trials continued, and victims were sent to the guillotine or were shot. He would also be ordered to not leave one single person who was suspected of being a monarchist alive, and with this the Committee of Public Safety endorsed his actions. Jean-Baptise Carrier then would place a huge number of people who had been arrested on board ships and boats which had a trapdoor in them. He would then release this and sink the men, women and children inside of the Loire River. Priests and nuns were also killed in this, which became known as the drowning at Nantes, and he ordered 94 priests in November of 1793 to be drowned in this way. He would sometimes tie prisoners together also, and he was described as one of those inferior and violent spirits who, in the excitement of civil wars, became monsters of cruelty and extravagance. However, he too would fall from grace. Carrier was sent back to Paris by Robespierre, and he returned due to the atrocities that had been carried out. But following the fall from grace of Robespierre, he would also be attacked by those who were fed up of the terror which gripped the nation. Many prisoners he brought from Nantes were acquitted and released, but he was then on the 3rd of September 1794 arrested. Carrier was brought before the Revolutionary Tribunal, and he spoke out against the inhumanity and said, "I took but little share in the policing of Nantes. I was only there in passing, being the first at Rennes, and, later, with the army. My principal task was to watch over and see the victualling of our troops, and for 6 months I supplied 200,000 men there, without it costing the state a halfpenny. Hence I have little information to offer in the matter. I know little or nothing of the accused." Following this, Carrier was charged with a huge degree of crimes including drowning, executions, theft, pillaging, causing famine, disorder, and butchering women and children. Because of this, a unanimous death sentence was passed against Jean-Baptise Carrier, and he was then in Paris taken to the guillotine on the 16th of December 1794. He was taken towards the device which had caused the executions of the French king and queen and many others, but Carrier was then strapped to the wooden board, and he was then slid under the blade before the executioner released the blade, and it fell, taking his head clean off. But following this, Madame Tussaud was ordered to take a death mask and cast Carrier's head, and she did this after his head had fallen into the basket before it was then buried. What Madame Tussaud would create would be the head of Jean-Baptise Carrier, which was incredibly lifelike. When you compare the head and cast taken off his face with images, it is almost a perfect likeness. Tussaud added blood around the face to show his head after he'd been guillotined, and what was strange is that she was allowed to do this in front of the crowds. But Jean-Baptise Carrier was a brute who was known for slaughter and execution across France. He was a man who was responsible for the deaths of thousands, and he too would go to the execution device that became known as the nation's razor for the amount that it would be used. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.